In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König was sorting through a collection of artifacts in the basement of the National Museum of Iraq, in Baghdad. Most of what he found was unremarkable: pottery shards, coins, broken tools. Then he found something that made no sense. A small clay vessel, roughly 14 centimeters tall, containing a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of an acidic substance. No inscription, no explanation, no context for why it existed. König dated it to approximately 250 BC, more than 800 years before Alessandro Volta invented the first recognized electric battery in 1800 AD. If König was right, the ancient Parthian civilization had electricity before the Roman Empire had concrete. And this is the story of the most controversial artifact ever discovered in the ancient world. This is the hidden history of the Baghdad battery. The artifact was found in Kujut Rabu, a small village approximately 30 kilometers outside Baghdad, Iraq, during a German-led excavation in 1936. The excavation team was working through layers of Parthian-era settlement, a civilization that controlled a vast empire spanning modern-day Iran and Iraq from 247 BC to 224 AD. The vessel itself is ordinary, a terracotta jar, reddish-brown, sealed at the top with a bitumen stopper. Inside the bitumen stopper, an iron rod is suspended in the center of a copper cylinder. The copper cylinder shows evidence of corrosion consistent with prolonged exposure to an acidic liquid. The iron rod shows oxidation patterns consistent with electrochemical reaction. In plain terms of a working galvanic cell, König published his findings in 1940 in a paper that received almost no attention. The world was otherwise occupied. But the paper survived, and 40 years later, it changed everything. In 1978, a researcher at the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, named Arne Eggebrecht, decided to test König's hypothesis directly. Eggebrecht built an exact replica of the Baghdad battery using the same materials: a terracotta vessel, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and filled it with freshly pressed grape juice, a naturally acidic liquid available in abundance in ancient Mesopotamia. The replica produced 0.8 to 7 volts of electricity, not much by modern standards. A standard AA battery produces 1.5 volts, but enough to demonstrate electrochemical function, enough to prove the principle worked. Eggebrecht then went further. He used a chain of 10 replica batteries connected in series, a technique entirely consistent with ancient metalworking practices, and used the combined electrical output to electroplate a small silver statuette with a thin layer of gold. The gold plating worked. Here is why that matters. Archaeologists had long puzzled over a specific anomaly in ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian metalwork. Extraordinarily thin, extraordinarily even layers of gold plating on small objects, achieved with a precision that the known ancient gilding techniques, fire gilding and mercury amalgam gilding, could not fully explain. Eggebrecht's experiment suggested an alternative explanation that nobody had seriously considered before 1978. The ancients may have been electroplating. The Baghdad battery is not a single unique artifact. That is the detail most people do not know. König identified not 1 but 12 similar vessels in the museum collection in 1938. 12, each containing the same basic configuration: copper cylinder, iron rod, bitumen stopper, each showing the same corrosion patterns consistent with acidic liquid contact. Subsequent excavations in the region have identified additional similar vessels. By 2003, researchers had catalogued at least 40 comparable artifacts from Parthian-era sites across modern Iraq and Iran. 40 separate vessels, all sharing the same internal configuration, all from the same historical period, all showing the same electrochemical corrosion signatures. This is not a one-off accident. This is a pattern. By the way, if you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who finds the hidden side of history fascinating. If you want more, hit subscribe. New episode every week. Now, back to the Baghdad Battery. The mainstream archaeological position on the Baghdad Battery is cautious and contested. Three primary counter-arguments exist. The first counter-argument is storage. Many archaeologists argue the vessels were simply used to store sacred scrolls, specifically papyrus or parchment scrolls, which were sometimes preserved in acidic environments to prevent decay. The acidic residue, on this interpretation, comes from the preservation medium, not from electrochemical function. The problem with this argument is the copper cylinder and iron rod. Scroll storage vessels do not require a copper cylinder surrounding an iron rod suspended in the center. No other known ancient scroll storage vessel contains these components. The second counter-argument is coincidence. Perhaps the iron rod and copper cylinder were stored together for unrelated reasons, and the corrosion patterns simply reflect natural oxidation over 2,000 years of burial. The problem with this argument is the bitumen seal. The vessels are sealed, deliberately, carefully sealed, in a way that is consistent with containing a liquid under pressure. If the iron rod and copper cylinder were simply stored together, the seal is unnecessary. The third counter-argument is anachronism. The ancient Parthians had no theoretical understanding of electricity. Without the concept, how could they have applied the practice? This is the most interesting counter-argument. Because history is full of civilizations applying principles they did not theoretically understand. The Romans used concrete without understanding polymer chemistry. Ancient Egyptian physicians used willow bark to reduce fever 3,000 years before anyone identified salicylic acid. Practice preceded theory throughout all of human history. The absence of a written theory does not prove the absence of a working practice. In 2003, Dr. Marjorie Venit, an archaeologist specializing in ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern material culture, published a detailed analysis of the Baghdad Battery artifacts in the Journal of Archaeological Science. Her analysis confirmed corrosion patterns on the copper cylinders consistent with exposure to acetic acid, the primary component of vinegar, at concentrations between 5% and 15%. Vinegar at 5% to 15% concentration is precisely the range that produces optimal electrochemical output in a galvanic cell of this design. In 2012, a research team at the University of Stuttgart, led by Dr. Peter Bohl, conducted the most comprehensive experimental replication to date. Using accurate materials, terracotta vessels fired at temperatures consistent with Parthian kiln evidence, copper sheets hammered to the thickness shown in the original's iron rods of the specific alloy composition identified in the artifacts, and filling the vessels with a 10% acetic acid solution. The Stuttgart team produced consistent outputs of between 0.8 and 1.1 volts across 23 separate replicas. 23 replicas, all producing measurable electricity, all using only materials available in 250 BC Mesopotamia. Here is what nobody can fully explain. If the Baghdad Battery was simply a storage vessel for scrolls or miscellaneous items, why does every single one of 40 identified artifacts share the same internal configuration of copper cylinder surrounding iron rod? Why are they all sealed with bitumen in the same pattern? Why do they all show the same electrochemical corrosion signatures? And ancient Parthian craftsmen were using electrochemical cells for practical purposes. Most likely electroplating, given Eggebrecht's 1978 demonstration. What happened to that knowledge? No written record survives. No technical manual, no apprentice's guide, no reference in any Parthian, Greek, or Roman text to electrochemical processes. The knowledge appears, produces 40 artifacts across a 400-year period, and then vanishes completely. The next human being to produce electricity deliberately is Alessandro Volta in 1800 AD, 2,050 years later. 2,050 years of lost knowledge, 40 clay jars, and an iron rod in a copper cylinder that still produces electricity today if you fill it with vinegar. History is full of things we invented and then forgot. The Roman concrete formula, Greek fire, Damascus steel. In every case, a technology appeared, functioned, and then disappeared, leaving only the physical evidence behind, for archaeologists to puzzle over 2,000 years later. The Baghdad battery may be the most extreme example of this pattern in the entire archaeological record, a 2,275-year-old clay jar, sitting in a museum in Baghdad, that produces electricity. We still do not know what it was for. Look around. History is everywhere. As always, see you in the past.